بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Alhamdulillah for allowing us to gather in his blessed house. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala render this a majlis al-dhikr, a majlis of Islamic reminder and remembrance, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as such grant it those rewards that he has associated with these blessed councils and blessed gatherings, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us to his straight path. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us a good understanding of this religion and allow it to be that which illuminates our path in this world, inshallah. So last we met, we talked about the battle of the Ulais and how the army of Bahman, who was the general who didn't join, was defeated, and this left the path to Hira open. And it was Hira, which is one of the prized cities of the Persian Empire, a great trading city that fed a lot of the empire, was now in the sights of the Muslims, and that Khaled al-Waleed radiallahu anhu and the Muslim army were now advancing to Hira, and they passed by a smaller city called Amarishia, and which was abandoned in haste and was a rich city. It was rich, full of goods, all of which fell to the spoils of the Muslim army and was divided accordingly to the Mujahideen, with a fifth going to Medina. And it was so much wealth that Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he called the people to the Masjid and praised Khalid ibn Walid and the Mujahideen for their many successes. And remember, you must bear in mind that this all has a significant moral impact or encouragement for the Muslims, because it was the Persians who were the mightiest military might in the world at the time and the longest standing empire. So one battle after another, and these are great battles, these are not small battles, and these were led by distinguished generals, people who had reached levels of infamy, I should say. Hormuz, for example, was infamous. He was feared among the Arabs in that region for his negative treatment. And subhanallah, his son actually would one day commit a great crime against the Muslims. Anyway, so now the Amarshia has been conquered, and now they are advancing to Hira. And the governor of Hira was Azazbeh, and he is now in a dilemma. He does not have a great army with him, because they have all, when the call for troops was made, they went to the army, and the armies were defeated. So he only has minimum garrison with him, and he is not a distinguished general like those who had fallen. He was a 50,000 cap general as opposed to 100,000 cap. And because the emperor instructions as to what to do. So he's in a dilemma now. But what he did decide was that I'm going to put up some type of defense and try my best to, if not stop the Muslims, delay them until we get some clarity as to what I should do. Should I abandon my post? Should I wait for reinforcements? Are reinforcements coming? What should I do? Right? So he instructed his son, who was in the military, to go downriver, or upriver, I should say, sorry, and dam the river, because he had suspected that the Muslims would use boats, or just in case, at the very least, the Muslims use boats, because remember, boats was a common or the main means of this logistic transport. Much easier. It was a established trade route from the ocean all the way through to Madain, the capital, and from there distributed across the entirety of the empire, all the way to India, everything. All directions of the empire. So that's what happened. Khalid ibn Waleed, he had instructed that all the heavy war machinery, all the bits and pieces that they had to carry should go on the boats, and that the Muslim army should travel light and easily, knowing that all the equipment is being shipped towards their Hira, which would be their next confrontation. And Khalid ibn Waleed, upon conquering these or defeating his enemies, he would also share some of his time and efforts in establishing the Muslim administration of these areas. So he was the general in charge of the army. He was the governor in charge of of administering these regions. He was the top magistrate in charge of the executive decisions regarding legal matters. He was the top lawyer. He would be the one making decisions as to who would enter into a truce and who would not, and what the conditions of that truce would be, or whose surrender we would accept and what the conditions of that surrender would be. He had a lot of duties to perform. Everything fell on him. Just like the Khalifa, by the way, a Khalifa is responsible for everything. On the Day of Judgment, he will be asked by Allah regarding everything. So that's why it's a big job. And once you understand this, you will understand, for example, later on when you know about the seerah, if you know a little bit of the seerah of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, you will know how he took it very seriously. Now, part of the agreement of surrender of the different regions and entering into a jizya pact or jizya treaty with the Muslims was that the Arabs were not permitted to serve the Persians in any shape or form. And if somebody was to be caught spying for the Persians or working for the Persians or assisting them, then they would be held to account. And because remember, this is an Arab region, right? And they would now have to serve as the spies for the Muslims, So whatever network they had of informants across which was Iraq today, they would keep the Khalifa, the General Khalid ibn Waleed apprised of the movements of the Persians and the movements of the Arabs who have allied with the Persians. Okay? And they would also have to serve as guides, because it's their region. They would have to show which way to go and whatnot, and they served as guides for the boat as well. They piloted the boat, they took the affairs of the boats, because Muslims, Arabs don't know anything about boats. And they don't swim. Boats hadn't come yet. They would come later, right? The Muslims didn't cross seas at the time. They were land people at the time. Rahmatullah alayhim ajma'in. So now the boats are going upstream, and slowly but surely the level of water drops, and the boats can no longer operate. So Khalid ibn Walid understood what happened. He understood that somebody had dammed the river. So he selected a handful of quick and capable riders and warriors to join him to quickly move to wherever would be the strategic place to dam the river. And the son of Azazbeh, I don't recall his name, he didn't completely appreciate just how quick the Muslims were and how decisive Khalid ibn Walid can be or is when it comes to military matters. So he was still, thinking, I'm far away from the Muslim army is so far away they wouldn't reach me, so he's taking his time. The next thing you know, Khalid ibn Walid himself and those with him have caught up with them or surprised them and slew all of them, except a couple who managed to escape and then inform Azazbeh that his son had died. So now Azazbeh, he has no troops, his son has died, and he receives news that the emperor Ardashir has fallen, and he would be the last in the line. There is no other emperor after this, right? Ardashir had fallen, and Bahan, we said that Bahan, the general, had now assumed there was a term, I can't remember, like a military rule. So he's heading the interim, the transitional government until such a time that they can find somebody from the bloodline. Because so if you don't know, the Persians boast of a continued bloodline of kings. That they all come from the same blood, and they have a book called the Book of Kings, where they trace their lineage, they claim all the way back to Adam, or back to the first person. Okay? Which of course is a bit of an exaggeration, of course. But nonetheless, that their king for legitimacy, or their emperor, would have to be somebody who shared that blood. But in the meantime, Bahan assumed this military rule and hasn't mobilized, because things are moving very quickly. The emperor just died. The court is in chaos. They have never lost such success, or not in recent history, successive losses from an enemy that they despise and give no value. So they really don't know what to do. Every army they send is defeated. Every great general they send is defeated. So they don't know what to do. Azazbeh understands this. So what does he do? He withdraws. He does not put up any resistance. Khalid ibn Walid doesn't know what at the time. But what he does is that he decides that he will not enter Hira from a frontal assault. So they take the long way around and enter it from the rear. And as they enter it from the rear, they find no opposition. The people are there watching. They are not armed. They're not scared. They're not doing anything. They're not fleeing. And they're not welcoming them. They're sort of suspended in judgment. In any case, the Muslims take Hira. The Muslims take Hira, and within Hira, so Hira is a city comprising numerous forts within the city. It's like an open plan city. So you can even say cities within cities, right? Within a major city. Now, there were 4 major forts, each led by some prince or some king or some Arab noble. The Persians had run away. The Arabs, this is the Arab capital. Right? So each fort closed its doors and prepared for a long siege, prepared for battle. Because remember, they don't know how the Muslims will rule. And all of this is happening within the matter of a couple of months. I think 2 months, just over 2 months, from the first entry into Iraq, into Persia, and to conquering Hira. So it's too short a time to tell how the Muslims will rule. And reports are still there. People have family that they have lost in battle, friends that they have lost in battle, relatives, etc. So of course, even if that they're unlikely to have an objective assessment of the situation. In any case, the Muslims take Hira, but they have to contend with these 4 forts. And the 4 forts are the White Palace, led by Iyas ibn Qubaysa, who was titled the King of Iraq. The Palace of Adasiyun, commanded by Adi ibn Adi. The Palace of Bani Mazin, commanded by Ibn Akal. The Palace of Ibn Buqayla, commanded by Abdul Masih ibn Amr ibn Buqayla. So Khalid ibn al-Waleed, he designates 4 of his commanders to take a number of troops and siege each one of these forts, to capture them. And the first, and among those commanders were Dirar ibn Azwar, Dirar ibn al-Khattab, and he's not related to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, but he shares the same last name. Dirar ibn al-Muqarrin and Muthanna ibn Harith al-Shaybani, the leader, you may say, of this region per se, or the 2IC in second in charge of the campaign. And the first person to engage the Qasr al-Bayda, the White Palace, was Dirar ibn Azwar, and that was the most formidable palace, and the best equipped, and it had a manjanik. Manjanik, it's like a catapult. It had a catapult, so it had the proper military machinery. And every time Dirar would try to reach the gates, either to scale it or to storm the gates, they would be pelted by arrows and what do you call that? Like molten steel or whatever it is, anything to harm the Muslims. So they were in a bit of a predicament. But nonetheless, these are Muslims, man. These are Muslim warriors, they're mujahideen. So what do they do? They somehow, Dirar ibn Azwar realizes that they have to take out their machinery, which poses the greatest threat. And because it has a long projectile distance, then it means that they had to retreat a significant distance in order to be safe from its assault. So he gathers a bunch of mujahideen, they cover themselves the best they can, and they rush the fort, and they take out everybody who was working on the manjanik, on the catapult. It's not a catapult, by the way, there's another name for it, but whatever, it's similar, okay? And they take out everybody. They take out and the archers take out as many as they could. And after seeing that their major military machinery was rendered ineffective, and they had no real means of countering the Muslims, they couldn't beat the Muslims. They would either, starve, right, and be forced out, or they needed to, while in a seemingly stronger position, negotiate. And the White Palace was the strongest of the forts. So if that was at the greatest threat, then all the other forts were at a greater threat. So between the four leaders of these 4 forts, they agreed that one person should be their voice and negotiate for them. And that was the commander of the Bani Buqayla, is a fort, right? Who was Abdul Masih. That's his name, Abdul Masih. So Abdul Masih now goes to Khalid ibn al-Waleed. And he was well respected and a very elderly man. it is said that his years reached in the 200, close to 200. This is reported as in the hiwar, the conversation between Khalid ibn Walid and Abdul Masih is actually recorded. So he was asked, how many years do you have? And he says 200. He's an old guy. And one way of them describing age, they say that not your eyebrows, whatever skin is here, has fallen. So it means that, when you're old, the skin has fallen, it had fallen down, so indicating he was an elderly person. In any case, he enters into a conversation with Khalid ibn Walid. Khalid ibn Walid asks him several questions, and he gave answers that confused Khalid ibn Walid. That made Khalid ibn Walid question the sanity of this person. He's old, he's gone senile. So he says that, why would you say that you are this region, the people are people of deceit, right, and plotting. So why is it that you have sent me a senile person to negotiate your welfare? There must be some plot behind it. So Abdul Masih didn't want Khalid ibn Walid to think that this was a ruse. It wasn't, right? So then he reassures that he is sane and is capable of answering numerous questions. He answers these questions satisfactorily, whatever it is, and enters into a negotiation with Khalid ibn Walid. And Khalid ibn Walid, they settle on them paying 190,000 dirhams every year as jizya. As you know, they offer Islam, they offer jizya, and they offer death, 3. So he accepts the jizya, and they conclude on 190,000 dirhams, which is a lot of money, and one princess. One princess. Because this guy is like a king, he is the most respected of them. And so there's one princess story. What happened is when Khalid ibn Walid was negotiating, the one Sahabi called Shuwail, comes to Khalid ibn Walid and says that I have been promised by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam the daughter of Abdul Masih named Kirama bint Abdul Masih. So Khalid ibn Walid says, what's this? Oh, this guy, he's telling me something. You've never been to Iraq, and you're saying you were promised this. So he investigates. You can't just take people on their word. And he verifies that the Prophet ﷺ actually did say this. So one day, the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with the Sahaba and talking about the future of Islam. And was saying that one day the Muslims will conquer Persia. And one day, and he describes a lady coming in black who was famed for her beauty. Famed. At that time, Karama bint Abdul Masih was well known for her beauty. So, and the Muslims will conquer this region and have her. So Shuwail then says to the Prophet ﷺ, make her mine. Ya Rasulullah, can I have her? Right? And Rasulullah ﷺ says, okay, she is yours. As a ghanima. Ghanima? Spoil of war. Spoil of war. Right? So this was said when Karima was young. But she has aged, she has lost her beauty, and she's now 80 years old. So she comes out and she hears, because now they've agreed that she is part of the negotiations, right? And that now she is the spoil of war, and this is like a princess, right? This is a person who has grown up in affluence, not Arab affluence, Persian affluence, right? High standard of affluence. The richest, at the time, most powerful, most influential, not civilization, empire. Okay, so she comes out, she's elderly, and she realizes that this person, because she hears the story that how she was promised and she was given to so and so and to Shuwail, and she says, this man is actually a fool and must think that I'm still young and still possess my beauty. So I will show my face to him so that he knows that I am elderly now. So she goes there and she meets Shuwail, and Shuwail is surprised because he's a simple person. And he's expecting beauty, but he sees an elderly grandma come out. So he's like, oh, what am I going to do with her? You know, this is not what I wanted. So he negotiates. So she says, why don't you name your price and I will buy my freedom. So this miskin, radiallahu anhu, he asked for 1,000 dirhams, right? Dirham is silver coins, 1,000. Because that was the largest number he could think of. So she paid so she gave the 1,000 dirhams then and there, and she was free. She's bought her freedom. It's all done. And then the people are laughing at him. The companions are laughing at him. And he says, why are you laughing at me? And they say, if you were to ask her 1,000, so 100,000 dirhams, she would have paid it. He said, I've missed out. Because the largest number he could think of was 1,000, which goes to show how, with the type of, that goes to show that they weren't spoilt with much materialism. Their imagination had not been exposed to such wealth. They cannot imagine it. Now, subhanallah, how Allah, as you know from the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Muslims struggled all their life while the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was alive. They did not know wealth. And in a few years, they're cutting gold. They're cutting it. Take it, jewels of the highest caliber of known existence at the time. They cut it and distribute like it's nothing. In a few years. Anyway. Yeah. So now they have taken Hira. All right. And Khalid al-Waleed then writes a letter to the different governors and princes and commanders and leaders in the region. And he says, in the name of Allah, the most gracious and most merciful, from Khalid ibn al-Waleed, and this is the version that went to the emperor, to the whoever's in charge, to the kings of Persia. Praise be to Allah, who has disrupted your system and thwarted your designs. And if he had not done so, it would have been worse for you. Meaning that if Allah has not awoken you in dunya, and you were to die in this ghafla, in this sense of heedlessness and ignorance, it would be worse for you. Meaning that wake up to the Islam now, before you are in eternal damnation. Would have been, this is what he means by you. Submit to our orders, and we shall leave you and your land in peace. Else you shall suffer subjugation at the hands of a people who love death as you love life. So it went to all the local Arab leaders, and it went to the palace, but it received no response from the palace. Now Khalid ibn Waleed is looking, he's achieved his objective. He has conquered, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Hira. Now, so he's not advancing further, but he also wants to address any threats to Hira, to whatever the Muslims had conquered thus far. And of those was two places which had Persian garrisons, which had some military might, even if it was not the same as the previous armies, but it was still nevertheless a threat, and that is Anbar and Ain al-Tamr. These are the two places. The first of which the Khalid ibn Waleed went to was Anbar. And Anbar is a fortified town and a commercial center where the trade from Syria and Persia would go. So it was also of an economic value as well. And you have to understand that when you conquer regions, or as a civilization, or in this case, the Muslim state, the Khilafah expands, you need to have the economic means to administer it. You want to go and the Muslims are facing numerous battles. Whatever funding they could get to support these campaigns, they needed it, right? They want to build infrastructure, they need funds. It's as simple as that. It is an economic necessity. So anyway, the Muslim army goes, Khalid ibn Walid leaves half of the Muslim army in Hira and to also patrol the regions all the way to northern Arabia. And he takes half the army, around 9,000 Muslim warriors, to Mujahideen, to pacify the region, what remains in the region. And in this fortified city, it had a moat. And it was a significant moat, it was deep, that secured the fort. It didn't give access to intruders or from the outside. And they destroyed the bridges when they heard the Muslims were coming. And every time, however, and this fortified town was governed by a Persian governor named Shirzad. And Shirzad was an intellectual, but with no experience in war. So Khalid ibn Walid, when he comes, the Muslim army is approaching the moat, looking, pretty much scoping out the moat all the way. Here's the moat, can't be that far. You can see the details of your enemy. And the people on the top of the fort, they're just watching the Muslims. They're not doing anything. So Khalid ibn Walid, he actually says, I see that these people know nothing about war. They haven't harassed the Muslims. They haven't pretty much allowed the Muslims free reign to assess their situation and develop a strategy. So, see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to understand that a person's awareness is contingent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah wants to blind somebody to something, they will. Have you had those moments where, with like a light bulb moment, all of a sudden you realize something, and when you realize it, you're like, how come I didn't see this before? It's so obvious. What is it that prevented you from knowing something 10 minutes ago, or all your life, and all of a sudden you see it now? And it's so simple, it's so obvious. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why knowledge is rizq. Knowledge is gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anyway, and if Allah wishes, He withholds it. If He wishes, He gives it. And one means of getting knowledge, and knowledge of yourself, knowledge of your Rabb, and knowledge of your path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Allah says, fear Allah, have piety, have righteousness, and Allah will teach you. Take away your stubbornness, take away your arrogance, take away your self-entitlement. Be humble, submit to Allah, and Allah will give you, teach you, educate you, enlighten you, illuminate. Inshallah. All right, so now they've scoped the area out, and now they enter into a proper formation to try to storm the fort. And as they get close, the moat is too deep for them to cross. It is too wide for them to do anything significant, and they don't know how to swim. No, they're not good at swimming. So what does Khalid ibn Walid decide to do? He decides to make a bridge made of flesh and bone. So what does he do? He takes all the old camels, he brings them near, and he gets the Muslims the Muslim archers to continue to harass the oh no, that's a different, sorry, that's coming. Oops. Anyway, I jumped the gun, sorry, I got confused. Is another. Anyway, so what happened is that Khalid ibn Walid says to his expert marksman, right? he says, ready, he gets 1,000 archers. And don't forget, these are archers who have been pretty much a year, just over a year of sustained battle. The Hurub Ridda, the apostate wars, and straight into, they haven't gone back, most of them. Most of them haven't returned to their homes over a year of constant battle, always ready. Anyway, they're seasoned. And he points 1,000, he says, aim for their eyes. So they ready the bow, but they don't put the arrow in, so as not to present themselves as a threat. And they have seen that these guys know nothing of war. They're not really, they feel safe with the moat. So what do? As soon as they get close, then they receive the signal from Khalid ibn Walid. They take out their arrows and they shoot and they aim for the eyes. And they blind them all. They blind all of those who are on the wall. And it reaches Shirzad that all of the patrol, the garrison, had been blinded by expert marksmen. So then he realizes, I'm not going to win this. I can't hold out. So might as well negotiate while I can. So he seeks to have surrender, but he wants to have a conditional. He wants to negotiate. So Khalid ibn Walid says no. Says it has to be an unconditional surrender. Because you have no advantage here. You bring nothing to negotiate. You're going to lose no matter what. Inshallah. Why would you give the kafir the enemy fighting you, any advantage? Right. So Shirzad realizes he can't do anything. So then he has a counter offer. And he says, look, why don't you just let me and the Persian garrison leave with our families back to Madain, Sistaphone, and we surrender, we'll open the gates to you. So Khalid ibn Walid accepts it on condition that they leave all their wealth here. They don't take anything with them. So whatever you need for your travels, that's it. Don't bring any of your wealth with you, then you can go. So he accepts it and he leaves. He saved himself, and the Persian officers and their families are free. Muslims take Anbar. The next fort is Ain al-Tamr. Ain al-Tamr is again a fortified city, again with a moat, and it is called Ain al-Tamr, like the spring of dates, because they had fertile land and there was a lot of agriculture and a lot of dates. It doesn't exist today, but that was the name of the place at the time. And sorry, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Yeah, so, all right. I forgot an important detail. All right. So we said that the Muslim archers had blinded the garrison on the roofs or on the fort, whatever it is. And they had requested a conditional surrender. And Khalid ibn Walid said, no, it has to be unconditional, that we will determine your fate. You cannot tell us what we do, you submit, and whatever we decide, we decide. Okay? So, at this time, Shirzad did not negotiate. He insisted that they would remain in their defenses. At that point, did Khalid ibn Walid decide to make a bridge of flesh and bone. And he took all the old camels, he gathered them, and as the archers are keeping the enemy at bay, they slaughtered the camels one after the other and dumped their bodies in the moat until it was enough for them to, to create a bridge. Even an unstable bridge, it was enough. And with that, the Muslims then had access to the walls, and it wasn't a very high wall, and it was easily scalable, right? They could climb it. So as soon as this happened, and the Muslims were about to scale the wall, then did Shirzad have that other, a counter offer, and they saved their life. All right. Okay. Now with the next one, Ain Tamr. Now, the Persian commander of Ain Tamr was Mahran ibn Bahram. Mahran ibn Bahram. And he was a proper general. He had expertise in war, and he was also a shrewd person. He also knows how to manage and save his skin. And the chief of the Arab tribe there was Aqa ibn Abi Aqa. Aqa ibn Abi Aqa. And the tribe was a fierce warrior tribe, Arab tribe, called Namr. So this Namr wouldn't submit. And this is their region, you have to understand. The Persians, they will return to their lands, return to their stronghold. They have no great affinity to this land. But the Arabs, this is their land, the land of their ancestors. Their women and children are here. Right? If they don't fight, then they're giving it up. The Persians are easy to go. They'll go back. They're what do you call this? They are colonizers. All right. So what happens is that Aqa says to Mahran that Arabs know how to deal best with Arabs. Allow me to take charge of dealing with Khalid ibn Walid. So Mahran, we said, was shrewd, was smart. Remember, a lot of these, the Persian rule was an oppressive rule. And we've said multiple times that they had little respect for Arabs and little appreciation for them. They despised them and thought they were lowly, wild, barbaric people. So Mahran gave Aqa the military leadership. And upon doing so, the Persian officers then asked him, why have you left the defenses in charge with the Arabs? And he says that, look, if they are victorious, then their victory is our victory. And if they fail, then they have weakened the enemy. They can die, doesn't matter, they've weakened them. So I say, okay. So Aqa ibn Amr gathers his forces, and they meet, they prepare for battle 10 miles from the fort in order to be away from, if it happens in their homeland, their houses, their shops, and all this are at risk, at threat, right? So perform the battle far away and minimize the damage, you may say, to infrastructure and whatnot. So now Khalid ibn Walid, he meets an army made up entirely of Arabs. And he's surprised because to date, all the battles have been a mixture of Persians and their Christian Arabs. These Arabs were Christian. And he realized that, these officers are pretty much leaving the Arabs to deal with them themselves. And without any clear instruction from the emperor, with political instability, no political clarity, it was like the Wild Wild West. Right? People could get away with things. If the emperor had said that you had to stay firm, then they would stay firm, because they would fear of the reprisal of should they leave their post. In any case, 3 battalions, 2 wings, and a center. Khalid ibn Walid does the same. Center, the 2 wings. He commands the center at the front of the center, but he wants to capture Aqa because he knows that if he were to cut the head of the snake, you may say, then everything else would fall into place. So he commands he instructs the commanders of the 2 wings to engage the enemy, but not with full force. Hold back a little bit. So they did so. They engaged the 2 wings, opposite wings engaged. And Aqa is commanding the central battalion, just like Khalid is commanding the central battalion. But Khalid doesn't advance. Naqa is wondering what's going on. Two wings have advanced, but the center hasn't. Usually the center commands what's going on, right? It's the head that controls the battlefield. And they don't know Khalid ibn Walid. These people are assuming a lot. They always taking Muslims for granted. They get closer, and all of a sudden Khalid ibn Walid attacks violently. He overruns them, overcomes them, and he captures Aqa. And as soon as they see that the central battalion has been overrun and their leader, their general, has been captured, the rest all flee. And as they flee, they're turning around, running away. And the Muslims are pursuing them and cutting them down. And those who are in the fort, this is 10 miles away, it's a bit of distance, Those who are in the fort, they see their people coming, but they also see the Muslims coming. So with every one of their people, right behind them is a Muslim. So if they were to, so they close the doors. Because if they let one, they've let the Muslims in as well. They closed the door, so nobody entered. So whoever was there was caught, those who were cut down, and the general's now there, their leader. Okay. So Khalid ibn Walid, he goes, these people insist to continue to fight. So Khalid ibn Walid, he gathers the leader, Aqa ibn Abi Aqa, parades them in front of the fort so that everybody can see, and beheads them. He beheads them, thinking that it would demoralize it. And why do they behead? So you have to understand the hukum in Islam. What do you do with a captive, a war captive? It is up to the general or the one in charge to decide. They can ransom them, they can behead them, it's up to them. Do what they do, they can let them free, it's up to them. Okay. So he beheads them, and you have to realize that you don't know how many Muslims they have killed. They've been in war, right? They probably killed, slew, or slayed several Muslims, who knows? Or half a Muslim, or a toe of a Muslim. Anyway, so Khalid ibn Walid thought that they would crumble at this moral defeat, but they didn't. They insisted that they would try to stay firm. But what had happened was that Mahran, upon seeing that the Arabs had been defeated, he himself left. He abandoned the fort. So the Persian garrison, and with the Persians, so the Persian garrison, their military might, had now left, abandoned it. So they had no real strength to fight the what do you call this? To fight the Muslims. So upon realizing that they had no strength, and their warriors had fallen in battle, and they had no hope of defeating the Muslims, they requested conditional surrender. And Khalid ibn Walid said, no, it has to be unconditional. You have nothing to bargain with. Okay? So they accepted an unconditional surrender, and Khalid ibn Walid ordered that anybody who had defended the fort and anybody who had fought the Muslims will all be killed. If you had not fought the Muslims, if you stayed at home, women and children all spared. But if you fought the Muslims, if you had taken up arms, then that's it. You have forfeited your life. Okay, and that's what. And in doing so, two of these threats had now fallen under, or had been pacified, and were no longer a threat. And upon hearing this, upon his return to Hira, he receives a letter from Ayad ibn Ghanam, who was appointed by Abu Bakr Siddiq to go to Dawmat al-Jandal which is in northern Arabia, the northern tip of Arabia, to pacify a the Bani Kalb, who was led by a person called Uqaydir. Uqaydir entered Islam after the Muslims had beaten them during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and then they apostatized, and then Amr ibn As was there, and they returned to Islam. But when Amr ibn As went to Syria, radiallahu anh, they reneged one more time. So they're rebellious. So Abu Bakr Siddiq sent another battalion to go deal with them. And because they were a fortified fort, it was not a simple fort, it was a strong fort, the Muslim army and Ayyad wasn't an experienced commander like Khalid ibn Waleed. So he wrote to Khalid ibn Waleed for assistance. So Khalid ibn Waleed, he goes off. And we'll stop there. Inshallah, next week we will finish the immediate campaign of Persia. And then we start with the battles with the Byzantines in Syria. It's crazy, subhanallah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to return to Islam its glory by empowering Muslims to reach and motivating us to reach the greatest heights, to not fear except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to realize with conviction that Allah is capable of anything and everything, and nothing is impossible. And what it requires is iman and dedication and sacrifice in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala liberate His holy land from the enemies of Islam and the enemies of Muslims and the enemies of humanity, and return His holy house to those who are most deserving of it. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala install in Muslim countries leaders who represent their faith and who represent the will of the people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establish the feet of those who are fighting steadfast in His path. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purify their niyyah and accept their shahada and ease their nafs and shifa, yashfi, cure the sicknesses of those who are suffering. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them and grant all Muslims a victory that is close, inshaAllah. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا معنا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سببا لمن اهتدى وصلي وسلم على رسول الله وصلى الله وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. We stop there. Sisters, you can go next week. Next week we have our class, and then we have also Qiyam al-Layl afterwards. So we will do maybe half a juz' or something like this in 8 rak'ah after the class, inshallah. All right. Assalamu alaikum.